All right, Skadoodlins, what's going on? I got a special treat for you today. I'm gonna give you guys a little lecture, and I guess I'm just tired of seeing all of this news about the mainstream media having a meltdown because Donald Trump is questioning Dr. Fauci. And, for those of you who've been following me for a while, you know that I really started this journey as a health freedom activist because of vaccines and other stuff, which leads to other things, which leads to other things, which leads to other things, as you would know if you went down the same journey yourself. And before Dr. Fauci became famous because of COVID, a lot of people in the health freedom community actually knew who this dude was. I'm really trying not to curse you guys. I hate him so much. But so, I mean, I'm already, I already had a bias against him because a lot of people, including myself, knew his sinister associations in the medical industry before this even broke out. So it's like once you know that somebody has lied and schemed and connived and let, millions of people die and they don't care. I mean, why would you trust them in any capacity whatsoever after that? So co-founder, a great researcher, April sent me this great article, and as I started to read it, I thought it would be a good starting point for a lecture about Dr. Fauci and also talking about the similarities between HIV and COVID as far as the scandal is concerned. So, yeah, I'm just going to read the article and stop, and then I'm also going to be inserting clips from people and maybe I found a couple of animations too that might go well, and I'll be doing commentary as I read. So, and I'll also put the article in the link so you can read it as well. All right, cool. Shedding Light on the Dishonorable Record of Dr. Fauci, a Real Mengele. I think that's how you say it. By William Engdahl. Engdahl. Darn it, should have practiced pronunciation. But this is a little bit of a lazy, spontaneous lecture. Okay. So, I'm going to start right here. All right. So, if you guys want to get the article, I'll leave it in the links below, and then you can read along. But I'm going to be stopping to do some further explanation, and also, I'll be adding clips and stuff, so it's not so boring. All right. Dramatic, political, and social decisions are being made across the United States and around the world on what emergency quarantine measures and other steps must be taken. In many cases, the radical and severe measures, such as shutting down the world economy, are being justified by COVID-19 case projections of morbidity into the future. By the way, I'm stopping. So by the way, there's a guy, I'm gonna put this link in the description too. His name is Neil Ferguson, and he was an epidemiologist that actually gave everyone projected models that like hundreds of thousands of people were going to die if they didn't shut down the world, right? And mind you, this guy has been abysmally wrong on things before, yet he's still working. But and yet people still decided to take his word for it. So after he made all of these projections and we shut down the world, it was determined that he was wrong by like 50 to 100 times, like some crazy number like that. But yet he's still working. He eventually ended up resigning, not because he was wrong about his projections. I don't even know why he has a license. I don't even know. But anyway, but because during quarantine, he actually he was diagnosed, or he supposedly tested positive for COVID-19 and was supposed to be quarantined. And he broke quarantine to visit his lover that he was having an affair with, and he got caught. And that's why he had to resign. So obviously he doesn't believe his own BS. I'm just saying. Okay, where did I start? I need a marker. Okay. If there is one person who is in the face of the current strategy of dealing with the coronavirus in Washington, It is the director of the U.S. National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, of the NIH, Dr. Tony Fauci. What major media conveniently leave out in discussing Fauci's role is his highly controversial and conflicted history since he first joined NIAID in 1984 during the beginnings of the AIDS pandemic. His role sheds valuable light on his remarkable and highly controversial actions today. Believe you me, this person that wrote this is not kidding. Okay. Tony Fauci, a leading member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, which is being promoted by major U.S. media such as CNN, NBC, or the New York Times, as a great expert on all related to the COVID outbreak. He had dismissed the president's efforts to promote a known malaria medication as treatment for severe corona patients as anecdotal, even though 7 years before he backed the same drug. So this dude, because see, this is the problem. It's people. I'm gonna leave the marker right here. I don't know where I stopped. Okay, so this is the problem, you guys, because a lot of people have goldfish memories. Because a lot of people don't understand. They see somebody in the public eye. They don't bother to research their history. They don't really understand even necessarily where to look, because it's like the way that the programming is when you go and Google Dr. Fauci. If you, for instance, if you were to Google, is Dr. Fauci corrupt? Probably one of the first searches you would get is SNOPES, or QUACKWATCH, or what is that, science-based medicine, basically, trying to ad hominem attack you for even thinking such a question. They'll just be like, no, silly, he's not a a corrupt person. He cares about you. How dare you ask that question, you stupid moron. But that's how it's set up. So if you don't know where to look too, and you're curious about it, or you'll find searches like, how dare Trump, question Fauci's credibility. He's stupid, So, but look at this. He basically is saying, oh, it's anecdotal. They gave this, and at first I was a little bit confused, because I know that there's some malaria pills. I think they're preventative pills that actually can cause you to be schizophrenic. But it's not hydrochloroquine. And from what I understand now, they give hydrochloroquine to people with already compromised immune systems, such as lupus. So if you're giving a drug to somebody with already compromised immune systems, they're going to be probably one of the first people to get sick from it, but it actually helps them get better. So, this has been given to people for years. It's been given to people in the military. From what I understand, I've heard that it's basically quinine and zinc, which is healthy for you. It allows certain minerals to get inside your cells. So even if you don't have COVID, but you're sick with something, if you can get healthy minerals inside of your cells, it would speed up the process of your healing, right? It's basically giving fuel to your immune system to help it heal, no matter what disease you have. So it's a really good option. No known or terrible side effects, and it's very, very cheap to make, okay? So I'm going to continue. He has publicly taken projections from an institute created in Washington State by the Gates Foundation, the same foundation that virtually owns the WHO and owns major stakes in leading vaccine makers, to claim that up to 200,000 Americans could die from COVID-19. Fauci stated that COVID-19 is probably about 10 times more lethal than the seasonal flu. And then didn't he come back and be like, oh, it's like the flu? What a liar, right? Okay, which would mean 300,000 to 600,000 coronavirus deaths this year. At the same time, in a respected medical journal, he compared COVID-19 as similar to a seasonal flu in morbidity. Duh. Okay, so see how he's backtracking? Anyway, this is even half the stuff that this guy's done, okay? Just wait, y'all, just wait. When questioned how long the shutdown of much of the U.S. economy must last, Fauci replied, only when there is zero new COVID positive or COVID-19 positive tested cases, something impossible given the defective testing. He has also backed direct human tests of novel vaccines with no prior animal tests, including with radical non-tested mRNA gene-edited vaccines. I'm going to insert a mini documentary somewhere in this lecture where there's a guy named Kary Mullis who was the inventor of the PCR test, which is the test they actually use to test COVID-19. And he talks about the inaccuracy of the test. He talks about the inaccuracy of how they've, they're determining that HIV, this is HIV because Dr. Mullis is dead now, but it's basically the same scam that they're running with AIDS. They're running with COVID, they've ran with Zika, and they ran with polio, basically. So, anyway, and I know in the documentary that I'm going to post or insert, he basically talks about the number of testing that is happening, and how because the tests give inaccurate results and false positives, the more people that get tested the more people are going to test positive. So it's the same thing, even though he's referring to HIV, but I want you to watch this documentary and I want you to make comparisons as to what's going on now. The similarities are in Canada. He's basically saying the same thing. The more people get tested for HIV, the more positive. The more people are getting tested for COVID-19, the more false positives. Both are using the same exact test to test, which gives false positives. They've known that this real-time PCR test has given false positives since like the 80s, okay? Fauci has more influence over U.S. national policy on the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic than anyone, including the president. Much of media treats him with awe as an unimpeachable scientist, one of the world's finest. Yeah, that's a joke. A closer look at Anthony Fauci's career gives a starkly different picture, a very alarming one, in fact. America's AIDS czar. Tony Fauci has held the top post at the NIAID in Washington for an astonishingly 36 years. Today, he is well past retirement age at 79 and holds the funds to determine which drug companies or university researchers will get previous government funds or not from NIAID's annual $5 billion budget. Okay? This is Dr. Robert Gallo. He's one of the co-discoverers of what they thought of HIV. So I don't think they mentioned Luc Montagnier here. I think in the Kary Mullis interview, he mentions Montagnier, but that's a whole nother video. I can't really go into that too. But when this happened, there's another guy named Luc Montagnier who also got credit for the discovery of HIV. So Robert Gallo is one, and then remember the French guy named Luc Montagnier, okay? And it's interesting because Luc Montagnier actually said, I'm going to go into a little bit more details about AIDS and HIV, but he basically said that, that the virus can be cleared and with, just without drugs and with, nutrition and health. He's on, I'll see if I can find that little snippet of him saying that. And he said that he tried to tell the NIH and other scientists about that, but keeping people sick makes more money than actually finding a cure. This is what the co-discoverer of HIV says, okay?
You talked about oxidative stress earlier. Is treating oxidative stress one of the best ways to deal with the African AIDS epidemic?
I think this is one way to approach, to decrease the rate of transmission, because I believe HIV, we can be exposed to HIV many times without being chronically infected. Our immune system could get rid of the virus within a few weeks if you have a good immune system. And this is a problem also of African people. Their nutrition is not very equilibrated. They are in oxidative stress, even they are not infected with HIV. So their immune system doesn't work well already. So it's prone, it can, allow HIV to get in and persist. So there are many ways which are not the vaccine, the magic name, the vaccine. Many ways to decrease the transmission just by simple measures of nutrition, giving antioxidants, proper antioxidants, hygiene measures, fighting the other infections. So they are not spectacular, but they could, decrease very well the epidemic to the level they are in Occidental countries,
So,
Western countries.
if you have a good immune system, then your body can naturally get rid of HIV.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Do you think we should have more of a push for antioxidants and things of that nature in Africa than antiretrovirals?
We should push for more, a combination of measures, antioxidant, but nutrition, advice and nutrition, fighting other infections, malaria, tuberculosis, parasitosis. Most children have worms. Education, of course, genital hygiene for women and men also. Very simple measure, which not very expensive, but which could do a lot. And this is my worry about the many spectacular action. Of course, there are global funds to buy drugs and so on, Bill Gates and so on, for the vaccine. But those kind of measures are not very well funded. They're not funded at all, or they are. It really depends on the local government to take conscious of this. But the local government, they take advice of the scientific advisors from the international institutions, and they don't get this kind of advice very often.
There's no money in nutrition, right? There's no profit.
There's no profit, yes. The water is important. Water is key.
Now, one thing you said, you were talking about the fact that if you have a built immune system, it is possible to get rid of HIV naturally. If you take a poor African who's been infected and you build up their immune system, is it possible for them to also naturally get rid of it?
I would think so.
Okay, that's an important.
It's
point.
important knowledge which is completely neglected. People always think of drugs and vaccine. So this is a message which may be different from what you heard before, no?
The closing?
No. Yes, my message is different from what you heard from Fauci or.
Yes, it's a little different.
It's a little different.
I'll just leave that with you before I begin the next paragraph. Okay. Let's go back to 1984 when Fauci was named head of NIAID during the Reagan era. That year, an AIDS researcher, Robert Gallo, working under Fauci, held a press conference to announce that he had discovered the AIDS virus. He said it was HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. The shocking announcement, which went around the world, was in complete disregard of scientific procedures and a prior peer-reviewed published scientific evidence, including the required electron microscope analysis. It was a case of science by press conference. As a critical scientist, Professor Peter H. Duesberg described it. Duesberg was an award-winning researcher at Berkeley who isolated the first cancer gene through his work on retroviruses in the 1970s and mapped the genetic structure of these viruses. I think I'm going to insert the documentary here. Okay, so I'm inserting here, and then I'll come back and I'll finish reading it. Actually, wait, I have to say something before I insert it. Peter Duesberg, wait. Okay, so required electron microscope analysis. There is something called Cox Postulates, and it is a 4-step process that scientists have to use in order to determine if a microbe is the cause of an illness and if it is transmittable to other healthy people. Actually, I'm going to start with that animation, and then I'll start with the Peter Duesberg thing.
Have you ever wondered how things get sick? They get infections due to contact with microorganisms, which are living things too small to see without magnification. All living things, including plants, animals, and people, can get sick. Until the late 1800s, people didn't understand how or why things got sick. Some people thought they became sick because of evil spirits like ghosts. Other people thought maybe things got sick because of bad smells. No one knew what was causing them to get sick. Before the 1800s, people believed in spontaneous generation. This was the idea that some living things, like flies, can appear out of regular objects, like garbage. A French scientist named Louis Pasteur changed the way we understand the world using science. He proved that spontaneous generation was not true. Instead, he gave an explanation called the germ theory. Germs, which are microorganisms, are all around us. He demonstrated that they were capable of spoiling foods, like grapes, when they come in contact with them. There was nothing spontaneous about it. This idea inspired a German scientist named Robert Koch to ask if microorganisms were causing disease. He exposed animals to different microbes. Certain microbes caused the animals to get sick and even die. Koch came up with 4 rules called Cox Postulates that are still used by doctors and scientists to test whether a microbe is making an animal or plant sick. The first rule requires that the microbe always be present in the organisms showing symptoms, which are signs that something is sick. To follow the second rule, the microbe must be removed from the organism and grown outside its host. This is called isolating a microbe. The third step is taking the isolated microbe and using it to infect a healthy host. This newly infected organism must show the same symptoms as the original sick host. The fourth and final rule requires that you isolate the same microbe from the newly infected host. These 4 steps are known as Cox Postulates.
But what I want to say is that, you can't see viruses. Okay, there's terrain theory and germ theory. I'm going with germ theory at the moment. I think terrain theory is a whole nother video, a whole nother rabbit hole that I don't want to go down right now. So just saying, if you person that believes that viruses cause people to be sick, science is a methodology, and this methodology has a method, and this is what distinguishes science between religion, is that you have an objective analysis, an objective method in order to figure things out. If you stray from that objective method, then it basically is no better than religion. It basically is religion, right? So you have to be able to isolate the microbe, and then see it under an electron microscope analysis, which you can only see viruses with an electron microscope. Bacteria are a little bit easier to see. You can culture them. They grow. They're way bigger than viruses. But they did not at the discovery, quote unquote, of HIV, they did not follow any of these procedures. They basically just made shit up. Okay, sorry, I cursed a little bit. Watch it. Okay, they just make, but that's to prevent people from making things up. But because a lot of the general public doesn't know this, and a lot of scientists assume that either this work has been done, or they don't have any balls to confront these scientists, because a lot of scientists, or to confront the elder scientists, because a lot of scientists have to rely on funding from university, from the NIH, from all these other institutions in order to keep their jobs. And then they also want, if they're teaching, if they're professors, they also want to get tenure. So nobody wants to rock the boat, and that's how a lot of science is controlled, okay? There are a few other avenues too, but that's one of the main reason is how science is controlled. So the general public doesn't know this information, so they're not going to ask the right questions. They're not going to know this stuff. And then, they're going to be controlled that way. So, all right, inserting the documentary now.
California microbiologist Dr. Curry Mullis was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1993 for his development of one of the most widely used current techniques in molecular biology today, the PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. This revolutionary technique allows scientists to take a sample containing a very minute amount of DNA and replicate that DNA sequence until there are many copies. One of the first applications of PCR was to analyze human tissue for the presence of HIV. PCR is commonly used in medical and biological research labs for the detection of virus culture in infectious persons.
The people that are AIDS researchers now are getting neurotic if you ask them any questions. There was a time when I first started asking questions, all I wanted was, where are the papers? Just tell me the papers that you read that convinced you that HIV was the cause of AIDS, because I need to reference those papers in some of the, I was working on a test for HIV with PCR, and I needed to write a little report to the NIH to say, here's the progress we've made, and the first line of it was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I thought that was true. This is before I got involved. And I said, what's the reference for that quote? And I looked for it for about 2 or 3 years, and I never could find it. And by the end of 2 years, I'd ask everybody at every meeting that I'd gone to that talked about AIDS, I'd ask, I'd look through every computer database. There is no reference. There is nobody who should get credit for that statement. Now, that's a pretty weird situation in science, where getting credit for a discovery is the most important thing in your life as a scientist. It's silly to hear people saying, you don't believe that HIV causes AIDS? You don't believe that? I mean, it's just a word, but it's a very, very important distinction. I think that that's why it's become a very emotional kind of thing, because people actually, they get personally committed to what really is a body of evidence that can be analyzed, by lots of people. And at this point, there's so much of it out there, nobody can really analyze all of it, but nobody can write a review of it that says HIV causes AIDS because of this. If a postdoc were to write a review of their literature that showed without much doubt that HIV was the cause of AIDS, that guy would be famous. Now, there's 100,000 guys out there who had the opportunity. 10 years has passed. We've been waiting for this star postdoctoral fella to distinguish himself forever and get a lifelong grant from Tony Fauci, but he hasn't shown up. No one has bothered to write a definitive review. Any journal would take it. That right there proves that HIV does not cause AIDS. Just because Bob Gallo gets up, takes his sunglasses off and says, gentlemen, you discovered the cause of AIDS. That's all we have. New York Times article, CDC report, that's all we have. That's not enough. That's not enough to that is not sufficient to publish even a meager little scientific paper somewhere. That isn't enough for scientists to believe some inconsequential fact about some star 50 light years away. That's certainly not enough to treat at the cost of billions of dollars a year, and at the cost of a lot of lives and anguish, and just destroyed. Lives have just been totally ruined by this thing on the basis of some flimsy little statement made by a guy who's known to be a crook in lots of other ways. He lied about a whole lot of other stuff. Why we trust him there? If he was a witness in a courtroom, we wouldn't trust his testimony. We've caught him in too many lies. So you don't trust him anymore. Scientists are supposed to have some evidence that leads them tentatively to some conclusion or to some action. They're supposed to be able to show that to other scientists, any interested person, in fact, who's willing to understand what it is that was used as evidence, should be able to say, yeah, I agree with that. That makes sense, using rules of inference that we've used since Aristotle. What they look for is surrogate markers. Now, have you heard that term battered about? Surrogate markers means, well, it doesn't seem to do anything for the disease, but it does every now and then do something for the level of CD4 cells that we measure, or it does something for this or that. Not that anybody really knows whether you want more or less CD4 cells at any particular time in your life. A lot of diseases cause CD4 to go up. A lot of diseases cause it to go down. Nobody's even sure if a CD4 cell is always a CD4 cell. It's a marker on the cell at the time that they do this little counting procedure, which is to stick a fluorescent tag on there and say the ones that light up have CD4 on the outside. And we don't really know what those cells do. The immune system is incredibly complicated. And the immunologists' brains are not nearly complicated enough to deal with it. We have these little, there are theories all over the place, but no real competent immunologists would tell you that CD4 levels was a surrogate marker for anything until we know more about it. But that's what they're using. That's what the FDA is saying, yeah. You don't have to show that it helps them. These protease inhibitors, the same thing. You don't have to show that it helps the patient. You don't have to show a single life saved. All you have to do is show some little clinical indicator has changed in a way that somebody is hoping is going to make you better. The chances of you getting a human virus today are a hell of a lot higher than they were, say, 10,000 years ago. And it goes up in a funny way. Let's just say that there are an infinite number of retroviruses in the world because they're changing so fast you couldn't really count them. And as more and more people are in your life, you get more and more chances of getting retroviruses. Now, they all might be harmless. The chances are good that they are because they're just barely alive. But if you hang out with 1,000 people a year in a way that would maybe allow you to get some or most of their retroviruses, and they hang out with 1,000 people a year, and they hang out with 1,000 people a year, you're hanging out with a fourth of the human race. You're getting all the retroviruses from all over the planet. Now, it might be that none of those things by themselves is going to hurt you, but we know that some of them do grow in your immune cells, right? And they come in at very low multiplicity. You don't make an immune response every time you get a retrovirus inside of you somewhere. But if you have a cell in your immune system that has a retrovirus in it, and you promote that to clonality because it's going to be a part of an immune response, that cell, then the retrovirus will definitely escape. It will flower in a sense, and it will then have to be dealt with by the immune system because there'll be enough of it showing in the blood that the immune system will go for it. Well, now, if you've got enough harmless but different retroviruses in your immune cells such that every time you mount a new immune response, which means you probably take about 500 different immune cells and make 1,000,000 copies out of each one of them, if you've got enough retroviruses in your immune system such that one of those 500 is going to have a retrovirus in it that you've never made an immune response to before, you're going to have to make an immune response to it this time because it will, if you make 1,000,000 copies of the cell, it's sure, the retrovirus is certain to flower, to like make infectious bodies, right? Then you have to make another immune response, right? It's called a chain reaction. Here we have a bunch of people that are definitely sick from some reason. It's likely that their behavior was so radically different than the behavior that had gone. It was an experimental kind of behavior in a way. It's not unlikely that they would have some kind of problems, some health problems. People stop sleeping and eating. People start using all kinds of substances instead of food. And they're associating with the world's getting more and more densely populated and we're spreading more and more diseases around. It's not totally shocking that those people should come down with some diseases that'll kill them. So we don't need to postulate that there was an infection going on since nobody actually did show that there was. Here comes Gallo and Montagnier and the NIH saying, that's right, it's something else. It's something you didn't have, you're not responsible for it. You're just the beginning of it. We're all going to get it. And they liked that so much because they said, we can go right ahead and do what we're doing. We just have to do a few little things differently and then we'll be okay. They cling to that, you know, and they think if you suggest that it's their activity, that the way they live their life, that you're a homophobe or something, you're some kind of an idiot. There's something wrong with you. There's some of them that aren't that stupid, but you know, there's a lot of them that are religiously associated with the notion. They believe in the notion that it is an infectious thing that will eventually sweep across the planet and kill everybody. PCR came along right about the same time that HIV did, and it was at CETUS that people started looking with PCR for HIV. That was the only way to see it, except for culture, which was a long, protracted procedure, which a lot of times didn't turn up the results there weren't very good either.
Can be contaminated.
Oh, the cultures, the whole method, that cell biology is a bunch of magic half the time. And those culture, you know, the people that say they can do quantitative estimations of HIV from cultures are just, they're fooling themselves. The number of cases reported went up epidemically, you know, exponentially, because the number of tests that was done went up exponentially. How many doctors knew about HIV in 1983? 2. How many knew about it in 1985? Say 500. How many knew about it in 1986? 40,000. So that's where the curve came from. How much money did we make off of HIV this year? And they could have plotted that, and it would have looked the same. You know, and they could have said it's an epidemic because we're making more and more money off of it every year. If it's just caused by needles, or it's just caused by homosexual activities, you're not going to really get a long, sustained public outcry against it, and nobody's going to want to spend $6 billion a year. They're going to say, well, we really didn't like those people anyhow. Great. I can't think of a better solution to the homosexual problem than a disease that'll kill them all. I mean, there would be congressmen that would talk about that quietly, not on television. So the CDC had to say, we can't say that. We've got to say it's got to be heterosexually transmitted. There's no proof that it's transmitted at all at that point. So why not just say, well, it's heterosexually transmitted too? Because that made it a plague, and the CDC needed one. The CDC hadn't had a good plague since polio. Their funding was probably going to be cut back if they didn't come up with one. The guy that was the head of the CDC, in fact, wrote memos that have been obtained, you know, where he describes this as hot stuff. You know, those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. The scientists are, like you say, they are considered the final arbiters of what's good for the planet or what's bad for the planet. And they hadn't got the slightest idea. Instead of wearing white robes, they wear white lab coats, you know. Instead of bringing you the word of God, they bring you the word of the EPA or whatever. And they don't have to understand what it is that they're making you do, in fact. And people, you know, I think they fall naturally into it because there is a need in humanity for something like a religion, something that makes you feel a part of some larger kind of group, something that you think, in spite of your wormy little life, makes you a part of something good, something big. When beliefs get tangled up with facts, matters of fact become matters of religious kind of significance, where if somebody gets mad at you for asking him a question in a scientific meeting, or says, we're never going to have Kary Mullis at the European Union of whatever kind of scientists, they put it in Nature, because he came in there and had the audacity to tell people that it might not be that bad to have sex, that AIDS might not be something you get from sex, that I don't see any evidence for it, is all I said. I don't see any evidence for it. Why? You can't tell young people that.
Today there are many scientists and physicians working within the conventional institutions who have similar viewpoints to those of the dissidents. Well, why don't they come out? Why don't they speak their minds? Is it possible that they take a look at what has happened when you do question the HIV equals AIDS equals death hypothesis? They've been suppressed. Dr. Peter Duesberg, noted scientist, was the main person in the line of fire.
Peter is a very scholarly person in addition to being brilliant too. He's very careful. He doesn't say anything that he can't support. And also one of the most brilliant people surely the most brilliant virologist.
Peter Duesberg at the University of California, Berkeley campus is seen as someone who is now dangerous. His funding has been cut off. Graduate students are encouraged not to take his courses, and I think his administrative duties have included being in charge of the department picnic.
My funding, for example, from the National Institute of Health will not be renewed as of this year, and I may be out of business then. Also, my colleagues have essentially excommunicated me. I'm not invited to meetings, or hardly ever to meetings anymore, not ever to one on AIDS. I'm not allowed to publish in the same journals anymore as I used to. Even as a member of the National Academy, I cannot publish in the National Academy my views that drugs may be the cause of AIDS. And I have plenty of evidence to support it, to document my claim, which might be very relevant to the health of millions of Americans and people on this planet. Yet I'm censored because I'm essentially considered to be an outcast or an odd man or somebody who has controversial views.
He was a really well thought of guy too because of his ideas. The whole field, I mean in cancer, he's the guy that led him into the whole oncogene thing, you know. Big research bonanza. Anybody who could order a little kit from some company and hire a couple of technicians could be a cancer researcher. because of things that Peter opened up. And then Peter said, no, I don't think that's actually the cause of cancer. And that made those guys a little bit angry. And then he comes along and does the same thing for AIDS. He said, you know, I think we're on the wrong track here. You know, it's just like in political scandals. Follow the money trail. Figure out who's getting paid for this. Who's getting the money for those Western blots. There's your person who's going to always come down on the side of, yeah, you got a confirmatory Western blots, they call it. They don't even do them in England anymore.
No,
but
not since 1992.
It's totally, and ask a doctor how it works. The doctor who prescribes, who says, got to have a Western blot to confirm this ELISA positive thing. How does that work, doctor? Sir, what are they now measuring about me that's different from what they measured with the ELISA test? He wouldn't know. He's not got any idea. I'll bet you there's scarcely 50 physicians in this country that know what a Western blot really is. They know when to order it, and they know they get a kickback on it probably.
AZT is an antiretroviral drug that became the first drug approved for the treatment of AIDS and HIV infection in 1987. It was originally intended to treat cancer, but it failed to show efficacy and had unacceptably high side effect profiles. However, the unavailability at that time for alternatives to treat AIDS affected the risk-benefit ratio greatly.
The antiviral drugs are chemotherapies. They're all based on chemotherapies that have been developed 30 years ago, long before AIDS was known, to kill human cells. Chemotherapy is restricted to a few months in the hope the cancer dies before you die.
If you started taking any other chemotherapeutic agent for the rest of your life, it would be that agent probably that killed you. You know, when you give chemotherapy to somebody with cancer, you give them a round of it for maybe 14 days or a few days. Hopefully you're not going to kill the patient, you're going to kill the cancer. The patient's going to survive. But you don't keep giving it to him until he dies, because he certainly will. The way to get rid of AIDS is to stop funding it. Just stop everything that's called AIDS research. Somebody tries to get a grant for AIDS research, say, we don't do it anymore. We don't have AIDS. If you want to study pneumocystis carinii, we'll maybe look at your paper and see if you've got, you know, something to say about that. You want to study any one of those diseases by itself, try to cure it, we'll talk about that. The thing that I learned, like back in 1968 when I first published a paper by myself in Nature in a field that I had no expertise in at all, there are no old wise men up there at the top of science. Which I really did until 68. I would have thought, you know, if you try to publish a dumb paper in a journal like Nature, it won't get published. If you try to publish a good paper in there, like I later tried to publish PCR, the invention of PCR, in the same journal, and they didn't take it. So it's up there. There isn't an up there. There's no place up on the Academy of Science is just a bunch of idiots, just like everybody else. You know, the editors of journals, austere journals even, they're just busy with their little lives and stuff. There are no old wise men up on the top making sure that we don't do something really dumb.
And I'm back, y'all. Okay, so here for Gallo and Fauci, that was unimportant, as millions in research funds flowed into the NIAID to research the new virus, HIV. Fauci and Gallo claim that AIDS was highly contagious, also by sexual transmission, especially among homosexual men. Notably, before the Gallo claim to have found the HIV/AIDS virus, NIAID had been doing research on the role of drugs, poppers, or nitrates for proven immune suppressants in the deaths of the earliest AIDS patients. If their kids are if you have kids around and you're listening to this, just pause it or get them out the room, because I have to talk about sexual stuff a little bit, just so you guys will understand where I'm going with this. So, in the 60s, 70s, 60s, I would say, anyway, a lot of suburban men who were gay, that were maybe married, were, you know, hiding the fact that they were homosexual or gay. And during the weekend, they go to, like, you know, in this area on the East Coast, outside of New York, they would go to the club club scene, which involved a lot of drugs and stuff, and they would do these things called poppers. And basically it would loosen you up like anally and make it more comfortable for you to have sex. But it ravaged your microgut biome. And if you guys know what the gut biome is now, that is basically the little universe inside your gut where you have a balance of bacteria and other microbes that actually keep your immune system running. And now it's presumed that 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So if you're doing these poppers, these nitrates, it's basically ravaging your immune system. And then a lot of people, in addition to that, what happened was a lot of people would get infections, or they would get sick, so then they'd be prescribed antibiotics. And now what we know about antibiotics, they would also ravage your immune system. So now these people don't have any way of fighting off their immune system. And they're susceptible to all these diseases. And once you have, AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, basically it's saying that your immune system doesn't have the power to fight off any microbe that it comes across, basically because your microgut biome is just destroyed. It's gone. It's like dropping a nuclear bomb in your gut, basically. And when AIDS first came out, it was called GRID, like gay something. It was something gay. I can't remember the acronym, but it was or the explanation of the acronym, but it was something. It was GRID. It was referring to gay men, and not gay women, but gay men in particular. And this is because I believe the evidence points to the use of poppers, nitrates, and then the antibiotics as they were used. So let me see. Toppers, and there is that were quickly. So there were actually people around this time that knew this, right? And they were like, no, it's not a virus, it's not a virus. So the story that they were trying to promote was a virus that you can catch was causing your immune system to break down, giving you AIDS. And then you die. You don't die from HIV. You die from basically a cold or something that you got because your immune system couldn't fight it off because you got AIDS. I hope that makes sense. But there were other scientists that were like, no, dude, it's not a virus. It's the fact that these people's immune systems are ravaged. And if you think about it, the same thing in Africa, where you see a lot of people that, kind of have the symptoms, they're wasting away. They have the Kaposi sarcoma, which are the little slow moving skin cancers you see. Their muscles deteriorating, they basically look like zombies. And it's because a lot of the Africans, in a lot of the poor countries, their crops have been decimated. They're not getting the right nutrition. They have poor sanitary conditions. They have a lot of waterborne illnesses, what basically leads to dysentery. When you have dysentery, your gut isn't functioning well as well. And that it's the same cause. It's not a virus. It doesn't make sense to me that it's a virus anymore. This is also very personal to me because I'm not saying that if you have AIDS, what am I trying to say? I'm not saying that if you have AIDS, I'm not saying that, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that I'm not trying to say that people aren't dying, people that have AIDS. I had two close people I know die of AIDS. One, when I was young, was a neighbor, and I actually watched him waste away. It was very, very scary. And he was, he's a good friend to the family. And then I had another guy that was even closer that I found out later he had AIDS. I guessed it after I saw my neighbor die, and then I saw the same symptoms with my family friend when I was a kid. But he, it was really sad because he gave us the story that, oh yeah, he went to Sizzler and he had shrimp poisoning, and that's why he was looking so bad. He got food poisoning, and we're like, okay, I guess. But it must have been very scary for him too, because the isolation, of people were like around the 80s, everybody was scared, just kind of like now, right? But it's on a bigger scale. Like it was people that if you had AIDS, it was very isolating. People didn't want to be around them because they were afraid that they were going to get it. So just think about this whole theory about making the cause a virus that somebody can catch, just like they're doing with COVID-19, right? Like it's a virus that you can catch, and now, it's putting dividing lines between people. Same thing, people didn't know at the time, before they said it was sexually transmitted, but they're like, oh, this new virus is out and you can get it. And, so people didn't know. They're like, oh, if somebody had it, people were freaking out. Like nobody wanted to be around you, it was very isolating. A lot of people I've heard talk about it, like in documentary style, or that have survived, basically said the isolation was probably worse than the disease itself. So anyway, but this dude, God, it's so hard not to call him bad names. So this this problem of AIDS could have been quickly solved if people knew, if this was widely known, that, oh, it's not a virus, it's, a ravaged microbiome problem. Let's give them probiotics and build up the biome and give them nutrition. It could have easily been fixed. But the whole theory about a virus causing the problem, is basically leading people down a wrong path. And if they're looking for a virus that's causing a problem, and if they're trying to make drugs to kill a virus that they think is causing a problem, but it's not, they'll never find a cure, basically. And it would create this perpetual cycle of people donating money and saying, oh, we'll have to find a cure, oh, we're close to finding a cure, but they're never going to find a cure because they're going about it in the wrong fashion, if that makes sense. Okay. So basically, it was quickly dropped, right? They were doing research on poppers and drugs and proven immune suppressants in the deaths of the earliest AIDS patients. That was quickly dropped in favor of researching a cure for AIDS. Media was told that AIDS was the public health threat to the century. Gallo went on to make millions on his patented blood test for HIV. Despite the fact that the test was often given false positives and did not test directly for the alleged virus, but for active antibodies. It's the same shit that they're doing with COVID, okay? It's the same stuff. It's the same thing. The tests give false positives. More people are testing positive because the amount of tests are going up. The testing is going up. But it doesn't test for the virus itself. It tests for active antibodies, okay? Something immunology practice said was not valid, as antibodies merely suggested a past infection response and not necessarily presence of HIV. At this time in the 1980s, Fauci was responsible for AIDS research at NIAID, a post he still holds. So this dude basically let millions of people die, right? Just totally nixed this research and purported the story that HIV causes AIDS. I hate him so much. Oh my God. If you've ever had anybody that's died of AIDS, and what they did, well, okay, let me see. They're gonna talk about it later. Okay. False test. The issue of HIV/AIDS tests is central. While a frightened world was clamoring for a test, Gallo and Fauci promoted their deeply flawed test of antibodies. In 2006, Gallo claimed HIV tests were highly accurate from the time they were developed in 1984 and have become much more accurate over time. So what does that mean? How is something accurate but then become much more accurate? That means it's not definitive. If something is definitive, then there's no need for accuracy. So it's like he basically is admitting that these tests, how do you, it's like either you have something or you don't, right? How do you have a false positive for something? Like, how do you promote tests that give you false positives? It's just beyond me how people fall for this stuff, how many passes these people are. Even some people that you tell this stuff to, they're just like, oh, I don't know, but some test is better than nothing. I'm like, no, fools, right? Either it's like, do you want to make sure that you really have cancer before you start taking poisonous chemotherapy drugs? Or do you kind of maybe sort of like, they'll just guess that you have cancer and you're going to poison your body anyway. It's the same stuff. And once you get tested, you're going to be put in a system. And it seems like to me that they're setting this up in order to make people stay on drugs that get positive testing. Okay? Gallo added in response to criticism, a PCR test for the presence of the virus itself can accurately determine a child's HIV status. That's BS. But anyway. In a short rebuttal of Gallo claims endorsed by Fauci and the NIAID as well as the CDC, Roberto A. Giraldo, MD, and Etienne, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Etienne de Harven, MD, the scientists who produced the first electron micrograph of a retrovirus, not HIV, but just of a retrovirus, pointed out that both the ELISA and the Western blot and a genetic test, the PCR or viral load test, the two major tests used to determine if one has AIDS, are invalid. None of these tests detect the HIV virus itself, nor do they detect HIV particles. They add that there are more than 70 different documented conditions that can cause antibody tests to react positive without an HIV infection. Among the false positives cases are influenza, the common cold, leprosy, or the existence of pregnancy. The same tests are used today to determine SARS-CoV-2 positive. All right. The fact that after 25 years of intense research, HIV has neither been isolated nor purified in terms of classical virology indicates to us that the infectious view of AIDS as a contagious viral disease is based on an apparently non-existent microbe. Giraldo and Harven declared the alleged existence of HIV was asserted from the study of proteins, reverse transcriptase activity, and RNA. Fragments that were found in culture supernatants were not from the direct analysis of pure viral particles. The CDC requires a positive antibody test for HIV to determine AIDS in the USA. Yet in Africa, since 1985, the WHO requires no HIV test or any other laboratory test. Now, it's the same stuff that they're doing, right? So it's like, why would in the USA they give a test to determine if somebody has HIV, but yet in Africa they don't? So basically, they're just guessing in Africa, right? And if you watch this really interesting documentary, The House of Number or two documentaries, The House of Numbers and The Emperor's New Virus, they also talk about that the diagnostic criteria changes depending on what country you're in. So if you're gay, that's going to determine, or black, that's going to determine whether you get an HIV diagnosis, which doesn't make sense, because it's like if you have diabetes or asthma or any other disease, your sexual orientation and race shouldn't be a factor. So if you're a white woman that tests positive for the test, but you're not gay or black, then you can still get that same positive test, and they're not going to determine that you have HIV. It's so fucking fake. I cursed. Okay, I tried. Merely the patient's symptoms that can include weight loss, chronic diarrhea, prolonged fever, persistent cough, and such symptoms endemic to chronic poverty, malnutrition, and lack of sanitation. So that's what I was talking about earlier, you guys, about like how this, in Africa, a lot of the poor countries, they have ravaged like crops. They're not getting, good nutrition. You're open to a whole host of diseases like kwashiorkor, yaws, lack of sanitation, dysentery, waterborne diseases, cholera, and stuff, and that can ravage your immune system as well. So, but yet, they're not testing them. They're just like, they got AIDS. They're sick. They got AIDS. Same thing that they're doing, right, with the coronavirus. You notice how they're not, a lot of the cases now, even they're saying that have been confirmed cases, quote unquote, are actually they're actually presumed cases, right? They're not. They haven't even been tested. They're just presuming, meaning they're bullshitting. Okay, that's just nowhere for bullshitting. Remember that. Okay. Yeah. Yet this fraud shaped the career of Tony Fauci for more than 35 years. Fauci, as head of the NIAID, has taken millions from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well as the Clinton Foundation, along with tens of billions from U.S. taxpayers for this bogus research. Suspiciously, the 2006 article by Giraldo and Harven was suddenly retracted by the journal in 2019, just before the coronavirus Wuhan outbreak. Isn't that interesting? And you know what else is interesting? Tony Fauci basically said in 2017 that the Trump administration was going to suffer from a surprise pandemic. How did he know that? Is he psychic or something? Maybe he had something to do with it. All right, so this is in January 2017, and Fauci saying no doubt Trump will face a surprise infectious disease outbreak. During a forum on pandemic preparedness at Georgetown University, Fauci said the Trump administration will not only be challenged by an ongoing global health threat such as influenza and HIV, but also a surprise disease outbreak. How did he know that? Oh my God. Do you know the winning lottery numbers too? Right? We will definitely get surprised in the next few years, he says. So I'm just going to leave this article in the links for you guys to read. Okay? Yeah, man, this is complete BS. BS. This is just like how did he know that? When they make the flu vaccine, you guys, they don't even know the strain, okay? They know that it comes around once a year, whatever. Some people will say it's not necessarily that. It's just a seasonal detox that a lot of people go through, especially if they're eating really bad or they're putting bad stuff into their bodies. But when they make the flu vaccine, they basically have to match the strain. And the strain that it usually is going around has always been inaccurate. Like, I don't think they've ever been accurate with the strain. And they just basically guess, okay? And when I found this out, I was so, bewildered. I actually went to a pharmacy and I asked the pharmacist. I was like, is this true? I mean, I had other sources, but I'm like, is this true? There's no method, okay? They're just guessing like witches or something. And she got angered with me. I was just asking, but she got angry with me. She's like, well, that's because they have to have enough. They have to have enough flu shots at everybody. I'm like, but you don't understand. They're guessing the strain that they don't even know. So they're making people get flu shots for something that they don't even know that's going to work by their own standards, okay? So Anthony Fauci knew 3 years before that. He just happened to predict or know that 3 years before that, during the Trump administration, there was going to be a surprise outbreak. Get out of here, dude. Get out of here. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, so then these people, right, that were basically challenging him and Gallo, these scientists, he probably ruined their careers too. He did that to Dr. Peter Duesberg, who I think he's also another virologist who was a Nobel laureate who actually isolated oncogenes, cancer-causing genes, and he was very well respected in his field. He was a teacher at Berkeley, tenured professor at Berkeley, and when he started to question HIV, they basically cut his funding, basically ruined his career, made everybody think he was crazy, just like they did Andrew Wakefield, just like they did Semmelweis. It's like every few decades there's a scientist or a doctor that has the balls to challenge the official narrative, and instead of rewarding them for the work that they're supposed to do, for the oaths that they're supposed to keep, they basically ruin their careers and their lives. And Fauci is one of the people that did that. He did that to Dr. Judy Mikovits. Put her in jail, okay? She went to jail, was threatened. had her career ruined, you know? What an awful human being. Hell yeah, Trump should be like, you know, questioning him. I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. I'm surprised that he didn't even vet him before he put him up, okay, where he was now. But whatever. Let's continue, okay? So this is suddenly retracted, right? Oh, I don't want to say this too. When they put retracted or withdrawal, that's another way of like censoring information, because you put that paper, show that paper to people, or the, you know, some of the journals to people, they'll like, oh, well, it's invalid because it was a retracted withdrawal. All they have to do is just put that stamp on it and make it seem like it's invalid information, especially for lazy people that, you know, are addicted to like their appeal to authority. Like, it's just going to really deter those people, and they won't even bother looking forward. And there's another doctor, his name is Jim Meehan, and he's actually used to work in he used to be an editor for medical journals, and he talked about how they would do that, and he talked about like how they wouldn't even publish certain information if it went against the pharmaceutical industry. So that's another way that this whole like this thuggy ass, you know, pharmaceutical gangster game is totally controlled. All right, let's go on. Despite the fact that he knew the established rules of virology, Fauci, as head of the NIAID, recommended the Burroughs welcome chemotherapy drug AZT as a preventative drug for HIV diagnosed patients even without symptoms. That's right. And you know what? The people that I knew that died, they didn't get sick until they started taking the drugs. So they were diagnosed with HIV with no symptoms, and then they started taking AZT, and it went downhill. And you know what's even interesting? I had a girlfriend whose father was gay, and his boyfriend and him had been together for like, I want to say almost 2 decades. And at, you know, closer to the end of the 2 decades, the boyfriend got diagnosed with HIV. And because he was diagnosed with HIV, he started taking the drugs. And when he started taking the drugs, he started to go downhill, and then he died. The father didn't get tested, didn't get symptoms, didn't get on drugs, and he's still alive today. So what does that tell you? What does that tell you? I don't know. But what was so crazy is I remember my friend talking to me about it, and she was so upset that her dad wouldn't get tested. And we're just like, why wouldn't we get tested? And we were too young to even understand any of this stuff. We're just like, we don't understand. Like, why wouldn't he get tested? That's stupid. Like, he needs to take care of his health and blah, 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 blah. You know, because we're brainwashed just like everybody else. And now, if I could talk to him today, I would be like, you knew, dude. You knew. How did you know? You knew. He knew. And a lot of people have observed this with people that have gotten diagnosed on drugs. Now what they're doing, they're saying, oh, people are living longer with the drugs. But either it's I would say, and this is a game they run because they've done this in other situations. It's either a placebo pill. So they're paying hundreds of dollars for placebo pills that aren't killing them. Or B, they're lowering the dosage of the drugs and just changing the name. All right? So that's how that game is played. All right. AZT, we're on the AZT drug, right? Even without symptoms. Burroughs welcome gave NIAID the study that was deliberately biased for AZT. Fauci even backed AZT for pregnant women despite the risk, the grave risk to the fetus. So this person, I want to call him bad names so bad. I'm trying to keep this as PG as possible. Because, you know, I want the people, the Christians or the people whose ears think are going to explode if they hear me say bad words. I want them to be able to tolerate this and share it, you know. But I don't see how you get to be a murderer, a mass murderer, and be called nice names. I'm just saying, okay? But anyway, so he even knew they had a study basically written for AZT that was talking about how great it was, and it was a black box drug, you guys. It was a black box chemotherapy. Okay, when you get cancer, or somebody gets cancer, and I'm not trying to put on you, but when somebody gets cancer, they get a round of chemotherapy because they know if they keep getting chemotherapy, it's going to kill the patient usually. So they give it like maybe a week or two and then break. And then you see how it went, and then you get it, and break. But you're taking these AZT pills every day, and they're chemotherapy drugs. Even in the smallest dosages, they're still like really, 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 really harmful. And even though pregnant women knows that it could like kill the baby, right? It's for pregnant women. He didn't care. Okay. One mark of pregnancy in all women is a higher level of antigens in the natural immune system fights any infection to protect the fetus. AZT, or Retrovar, a failed leukemia drug, has been proven to be a highly toxic drug. It was approved for AIDS testing in a record 5 days. 5 days. Yeah, that sounds just about right. I think that was the amount of time that they used for the was it 4 days for the HPV vaccine? They only like studied it for 4 days. I'm not kidding you guys. Polio vaccine was 48 hours, which is 2 days. Okay, and you should look up the Cutter incident. See that 40,000 people actually got polio from the vaccine, and they wonder why people are skeptical of vaccines. They wonder why the anti-vax movement is growing. I'm just saying. Okay, but it was approved for AIDS testing in a record 5 days by Fauci and the government in 1987, because that's the only in the that's you only need 5 days, right, to figure out if it's going to kill somebody over like a 30, 40 year, 20 year period, but whatever. Today, despite more than 30 years funded research and billions of dollars, no effective vaccine for HIV/AIDS exists. We're still looking for a cure. We're getting really close, you guys. Send us let's raise another $50 million for our AIDS walk. Let's do that. Because that's where we're going to defeat AIDS. Okay, Fauci and Gilead. I don't know. I apologize. I don't know these 4 names. All right. I'm trying to make it a little entertaining. I know it's a lot of reading, but, we're going to get through this. According to people who have studied the role of Tony Fauci as head of NIAID, his focus has been what is called scientific reductionism, described as a 19th century style single germ theory for complex of web factors that collapse the immune system of a subset of gay men in the 1980s. He has refused to explore the documentation that a variety of lethal drugs and other toxins such as nitrates can play a role. As a result, he has wasted tens of billions of taxpayers' dollars since 1984 on dead experiments. One of his most nefarious was his collaboration with Gilead Sciences. Not satisfied with having developed a false positive test for kids and having gained FDA fast-track approval for AZT to treat HIV-positive patients with serious illness symptoms. Oh, you mean just like they're trying to fast-track the coronavirus vaccine? Yeah, look at the similarities. Okay, Fauci decided to collaborate with Gilead, as in the biblical term Gilead. I still don't know how to say that. I'm just going to sound really cultured Gilead, on what came to be called the PEP experiments. Fauci promoted Truvada, AZT, as a prophylactic to the AIDS virus. Fauci in 2007 began to finance clinical trials of AZT in HIV negatives, only on the theory the chemotherapy drug would protect them from becoming positive. Oh, this is so fake. This science is so bogus. I swear, guys. Okay, that is testing toxic HIV drugs on otherwise healthy persons to ensure they never got AIDS. So you won't get AIDS. You know why you won't get AIDS? Because you're gonna die from the drugs before you can get AIDS. That's why it'll just kill you. So yeah, you won't get AIDS. He's not lying. It's not like he's lying, right? If it sounds mad, it was. Gilead supplied the drug Truvada to NIAID between 2007 and 2012 for phase 3 human tests on HIV-negative subjects. 4 tests of at least 2,000 and up to 5,000 test subjects each were done. Oh, that's just another 5,000 people lives and health that he ruined, but who cares? The project was called Pre-Exposure Prophylactic, or PrEP. Healthy subjects were given doses of chemotherapy Truvada on the thesis that can prevent them from one day getting HIV positive. CDC, in its May 2004 recommendation, urged physicians to prescribe Truvada for negatives in the so-called risk group, an official government imprimatur for an extremely profitable drug. The FDA ignored 2 of the 4 Truvada tests that had failed and had been halted. Despite that, and owing to data manipulation by Fauci's Laureate and Gilead, the FDA approved the dangerous Truvada for PrEP. Today, Gilead lists the side effects of Truvada: kidney problems, including kidney failure, worsening hepatitis B, too much lactic acid in your blood, which can lead to death, severe liver problems, which can lead to death, bone problems. They state that Truvada can also reduce the risk of getting HIV through sex, which when taken every day and used together with safer practices. Oh, they're so full of shit. Okay, this is no longer a PG. I swear, when I do my courses, I'll edit it. I'm just throwing this up. I'll edit it. It won't be any cursing. I'll be more professional. I can't, like, I get more mad when I'm reading the medical stuff because I know that people are directly dying and suffering because of this. I just, I've personally been affected. I have so many people that have been affected, whether it was through HIV or, AIDS drugs or vaccines. It's the same stuff. Okay, I'm here. The Fauci-Gilead scam promoting Truvada to healthy people to reduce the risk of HIV is a marker for the level of medical malpractice and, in some cases, evident criminal abuse of the human health that current White House coronavirus guru A. Fauci represents. By the way, medical industry, third leading cause of death, I'm arguing is probably number 1, but just from the data we have from mainstream sources, by the way, they list it as number 3, but there are other, I'm saying it's number 1 because there are other factors they're not counting there. I don't think they count out like vaccine deaths and stuff like that, because even though they admitted that, they're still trying to say that vaccines are the greatest thing since sliced bread, so they're not even acknowledging that. Anyway, Fauci and COVID-19. In October 2019, Fauci and his NIAID got $100 million from the Gates Foundation to develop gene-based therapy for HIV and sickle cell disease. That means at the same time, the first claims of novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China, Fauci was still promoting a 35-year-old fraud around HIV. Fauci is also part of the Gates Foundation cabal. Yup. In 2012, Fauci was named one of the 5 leadership councils of the Gates Foundation and created a global vaccine action plan. That's right. This is highly relevant to his role today as the Trump administration's coronavirus pope. Had his NIAID or any other laboratory in the world rigorously with electron microscopy isolated and purified samples of the patients tested SARS-CoV-2 positive for COVID-19? Or are the virus proofs as faulty as Fauci and the AIDS clique have made for HIV? So it's basically, my observation, it's the same stuff that they're doing with coronavirus, right? They haven't properly isolated, just like HIV. They didn't go through the Cox Postulates steps. I think that they were maybe, scientists that were on the lower echelons that were trying to mix exosomes and stuff together to make a biochemical weapon. I'm not doubting that people haven't tried to make biochemical weapons, but what they're really doing is, so if you have somebody that's been tested or diagnosed with COVID, basically what they're doing is just, because they haven't isolated it, they can just say something like the common cold is COVID or something like the flu, right? The symptoms are the same. The symptoms of any lung infection is the same. Bronchitis, the flu. So if you have somebody, they just, but doctors they're presuming, or they're doing a test and it's giving a false positive, but because they haven't isolated and followed Cox Postulates, they have no way of determining if COVID-19 is causing the respiratory infection. I hope that makes sense, because I know I have a lot of people that get mad at me, and when they're like, well, I know some person, that was diagnosed with COVID-19. I know, somebody in the hospital, COVID is real. I'm not saying that sickness isn't real. I'm not saying that it's not real. If there was no, media coverage, they probably would be diagnosed with the flu or bronchitis or pneumonia, which people do die from, you know. But like I said, and the symptoms are the same. So how do you know? You're just basically going on their word, and the doctors don't do any critically thinking, as we talk about in this hospital. So they, if they're just guessing, they're like, oh, well, COVID's going around and it's a thing. So even though, your lungs are filled with fluid and mucus and you have a fever and a cough and you feel like you can't breathe, oh, COVID, that's the same symptoms too. So you probably just have COVID, right? That's what they're doing. I used to get chronic, I've had a history of respiratory problems. I used to get chronic pneumonia and bronchitis a lot when I was younger. And I've had pneumonia so many times I could, I probably couldn't get it on my fingers. I mean, I used to, my respiratory system, immune system is really messed up. Technically, I'm immune compromised, so when this COVID thing broke out too, I had people that were like calling me, and they're like, you better watch out, oh my God, stay inside, you're gonna die. I was like, yeah, this is some bullshit, so I'm gonna just continue my life as normal, and now I understand how my immune system works, and I don't even get sick like I usually do, all right, like I used to do. I used to get sick all the time. Before, I think around 10 years ago, what was it? Yeah, about 10 years ago now, when I moved to Taiwan, is when I really, really started to take charge of my immune system and understanding how it worked. And what am I trying to say? Yeah, I started, once I understood the things I did or didn't put into my body and certain things that I needed, I don't really get sick as much. I exercise more. I mean, all of that has a huge effect on your immune system. And it took a while to get there. I'm not saying it happened overnight. But, I mean, it's like I said earlier in the video, that's a whole nother conversation on the terrain theory and why that is. But I can't go into that today. Okay, we're almost done. In addition, Laureate is working with Gilead to conduct phase 2 human trials on Gilead's drug Remdesivir. Now, let me just... oh my God. So basically, where was it up here where it was talking about AZT, right? Truvada, which was AZT, kidney problems, including kidney failure, worsening hepatitis B, too much lactic acid in your blood, which can also lead to death, severe liver problems, which can lead to death, bone problems, okay? So these are all of the side effects for AZT and Truvada. And look, they're basically going to do the same thing again with Remdesivir. I wonder if it's even the same drug and they've just changed the name. But basically, I looked up, where is that? Remdesivir side effects, right? And it was like, okay, maybe not. I thought I saw liver problems. Basically, adverse effects. Hepatic enzymes, yeah. And diarrhea, rash, renal impairment, which is kidney problems, hypotension, which is low blood pressures, increased hepatic enzymes. I think that, let me see, hepatic, I think that's referring to the liver. Let me just double check. Yeah, hepatic. So all of this stuff, right, basically it seems like it's kind of mirroring, right? And even, reported in 60% of patients, okay? And then all these other acute kidney and septic shock, multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, acute kidney injury reported in 23%, right? I mean, come on, man. Like, it's the same game, man. They're just changing the names. Like, how do you not see this? This is just ridiculous, okay? But, but hydrochloroquine that doesn't have any of these, adverse effects or any of this stuff is, is like so dangerous, right? And it's way cheaper to make. Get out of here, man. Right? So if you get tested and you test positive with the fake false positive test that they have for a virus that they haven't even isolated, that they can't even say what's causing the sickness, they're going to try and make you take this drug, which is going to give you these symptoms, okay? Which is going to lead to more drugs or possibly even death. So, I'm just saying, wait, where am I? Okay. Coincidence? Relevant also is the fact that all top scientific advisors to the U.S. President's task force on COVID-19 are tied since decades to the bogus and destructive HIV research and propagation of false theories. Alongside Tony Fauci of the NIAID stands Deborah L. Birx, MD, Obama appointee as U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator whose work under Tony Fauci at NIAID from 1983 to 1986. I hope they burn in hell. I hope we get to watch them burn in hell. Okay? Robert Redfield is the current director of the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, center of the recent coronavirus testing scandal. Redfield co-founded with the discredited Robert Gallo and former Fauci colleague in the AIDS scandal of the early 1980s. In NIH, the Institute of Human Virology based at the University of Maryland, Redfield Birx also co-authored numerous scientific articles on purported HIV vaccines, none of which have been effective. Robert Redfield, director of the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, Fauci, Birx, and Redfield, all incestuously complicit in the HIV/AIDS frauds and malpractice, today hold the future of not only American public health, but also the entire world economy in their hands. Not a good situation, as their work on the prove HIV equals IDS fraud shows. The coronavirus tests do not at all prove presence of a deadly virus in any patient. If this is so, it is perhaps the greatest criminal fraud in medical history. Bingo! All right, y'all. I hope I stop. It's really not that much. It's really not long and a long article. It's probably long because I'm inserting things. I'm adding my personal opinions on things. But if you can see, if you look into this, if you look into HIV, if you look into coronavirus, if you look into Zika, and if you look into polio, it's the same like game that they run. They don't isolate the virus properly. There's no proof of it existing. If you look at Dr. Kaufman's lectures that you see, but any of any picture that you see claiming it's the virus, it's a computer generated or animated version. That's not what it looks like. If it's colored, there's not, the electron micrographs don't have color in them. And then if you see a electron micrograph of it, they're just basically showing particles which are viruses. There's no distinction between what virus is what. So it's all based on BS. It's all BS, okay? So, even with Zika, what they were doing is, in that area of Brazil, they were using pesticides and they had those genetically modified mosquitoes. And those also can cause, that situation can also cause microcephaly. But the thing about industry too, they love to blame something on a virus, because if something is blamed on a virus, it becomes force majeure. You can't sue a virus. You can sue a company for a corporation for leaching toxins and chemicals. But if it's a virus, then, oh well, not our fault. What are we going to do about it, right? So, yeah, I hope, oh, shoot. My notes page, you guys, you saw my notes. All right, what else was I going to talk about? Oh, I just want to say this too. Another way they can create illness is is actually through the blood-brain barrier. So I saw this. Let me see if I can make this bigger. I saw this floating around Facebook, and it basically says, do not consent to nose swab testing. Read this report. And basically they're saying avoid the COVID test at all costs. These swabs may be and probably are contaminated with something dangerous, like viruses or something we don't understand. People should be just as concerned with the swab as they are about the vaccine. Very dangerous, okay? So, meaning maybe a chemical or either something else that can make us sick. The blood-brain barrier is a bunch of capillaries that basically prevents certain things and chemicals from getting up to the brain. When you get vaccinated, certain chemicals in the vaccine also can pass through the blood-brain barrier. A lot of mainstream science won't admit this, but it's been proven that it has been. They use polysorbate 80, which is a chemotherapy drug, or it's not a chemotherapy drug, but they use it in chemotherapy drugs to help treat brain cancer because it can reach the blood-brain barrier, but that's because it's injected to you. But this meme is floating around Facebook. So it's basically saying, I was wondering why the PCR test for COVID-19 had to be so far back, and it got me thinking, how far does it go? So I did some research and found these two pictures and overlapped them. The surprising evidence was shocking. The blood-brain barrier is exactly where the swab test has to be placed. Coincidence? I don't think so. So within, I would even say hours that this was floating around Facebook, the science Nazi fact checkers were writing articles. COVID test swabs do not damage the blood-brain barrier, right? And then, no, the COVID nasal test does not swab the blood-brain barrier. Fact check, COVID nasal swabs tests don't touch the blood-brain barrier, right? But, you know, I started thinking, is that true, really, right? But anytime something gets fact-checked, I'm like, yeah, there's truth to it because they're trying to hide something, right, by these fake-ass fact-checkers. So I actually found this, basically, nasal lining used to breach blood-brain barrier. Using mucosa, this is from Science Daily, using mucosa or the lining of the nose, researchers have demonstrated what may be the first known method to permanently bypass the blood-brain barrier, thus opening the door to new treatment options for those with neurodegenerative and CNS disease. So the pharmaceutical industry is actually using that route in order to breach the blood-brain barrier. So that's complete, they're lying, right? And then I found another one. Can nasal delivery bypass the blood-brain barrier? Questioning direct transport theory. So there are people that are actually have been looking into this. This was 2007. This was 2013. There were people that were actually looking into this to see, you know, how they can get past the blood-brain barrier. So if you're get a swab test, it's reaching all the way up there. I would say why also, you know, take into the count that if COVID is supposed to be a respiratory infection, your respiratory system is like your chest, and the closest part to your chest is like your throat. So why isn't it a throat swab? Why isn't it a throat swab instead of a nasal swab? Right? Doesn't make sense to me, right? Just, you know, you can figure a lot of this stuff out with common sense. Anyway, y'all, that is my story today, and I am sticking to it, but I will leave lots of juicy links for you guys so you can do your own research like I always suggest that you do, and I will talk to you later. Oh, one thing I want to say, I know this is really long. I don't really intend to do a lot of rants this week because I'm busy and I'm trying to develop the course that I'm developing. It will be shorter. I mean, the modules will be short. It'll be long, but, you know, it won't be as drawn out as this. But I was reading this morning, and I just thought that I would share this with you guys. But yeah, you know, it's going to be a long one. So if you really are interested, don't get overwhelmed. Just break it up. So if I'm not going to do any rants this week, you know, watch 10 minutes a day for the rest of the week or something like that. I hope that this was very informative and, yeah, and empowering for you guys to know this information. I will talk to you later, y'all. Bye. Peace, truth, and love. Mwah.